Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to talk about the first big release of the two releases this weekend in theaters, and that is Wicked. This movie is directed by Jon M Chu, starring Cynthia, Erivo, Ariana Grande, Jonathan Bailey, Jeff Goldblum, and Michelle Yeoh. And I honestly was very excited for this movie as somebody who does like musicals. I do think that that is going to be the main preface that everybody's going to say before any review, is that if you don't like musicals, if you have a bias against them, this movie's not going to win you over. If you're, lukewarm on musicals and you like them when they're done well, I do think that this movie is one of the better movie musicals that has been released in the past few years. This is directed by Jon M Chu, who has done movies like In the Heights, which is a really great musical if you have not seen that one. And this is just a further expansion of him just really going all out on a musical in a much larger playground that is the wonderful world of the Wizard of Oz. This is also part one of the adaptation of the Broadway musical, which is an adaptation of a book, which is an, retelling of sorts of the original Wizard of Oz, both book / movie, which was 85 plus years ago at this point. And so there's a long storied history of the world of Oz and of, this movie becoming a thing, releasing in theaters this weekend. And I wanted to get a little bit more in depth with this one, so I did go ahead and watch a really great green slime tutorial. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. So I will be getting into the differences between the Broadway show and the movie itself later on in this review, but let's just talk about the film as it stands here at the very beginning with full spoilers. So if you have not had a chance to watch Wicked in theaters yet, go check it out, come back here, and let's get into it. So what is this film about? Well, essentially it follows Ariana Grande as Galinda, who is telling the story of how the Wicked Witch became the Wicked Witch of the West to the people of Munchkin Town, and how they were actually friends when they grew up inside of this boarding school of sorts, and they went from enemies to friends to breaking up once again, and she became the Wicked Witch of the West, and how that was all, kind of manipulated to be in this story. And honestly, I really love the actual arcs in this film, because the highlights of this movie is by far Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo and their dynamic and their chemistry and how they bounce off of each other throughout the entirety of this film. And there's two different reactions that you get out of walking out of this film. If you don't know who Cynthia Erivo is, I think she is going to be the standout for you. As for me, I had seen her in movies like Bad Times at El Royale, so I knew she was a phenomenal singer. I knew she's a phenomenal actress. I was expecting her to be great in this movie, but what I wasn't expecting in this film was Ariana Grande. And yes, I did watch Victorious. I did watch her days on Nickelodeon. I don't really listen to a lot of her music outside of that, and beyond that, she's a massive pop star, but I didn't really realize how much she wanted this role and how she was very dedicated to this thing for years. And I think if I got anything out of this film is that Ariana Grande is perfect for this role. She was genuinely born to play Glinda, and she just has the perfect amount of just I guess she's a very unlikable character on paper. She's a very terrible person. She's very conceited. She's very self-absorbed. She's very hyper-focused on herself and thinks that she should be able to walk through life without having any roadblocks whatsoever. Everything just kind of falls at her feet, and she just lives everything to the fullest. And this character is obnoxious because of all of that. But because you have Ariana Grande playing this character, she is never unlikable to watch on screen. She is always entertaining. She is the humor of this movie. And I think pretty much every single joke that she has in this movie, at least for me and the audience that I watched it with, absolutely just landed. And of course, as somebody who was expecting Cynthia Erivo to be as great as she was in this movie, of course she was great in this movie. Her singing voice is absolutely beautiful. The Wizard and I music number and of course Defying Gravity are absolutely stunning. I think her voice is incredible for this role, and this character is definitely more of the more reserved character, whereas Galinda gets the flashier role. And so Cynthia Erivo, I think, kind of fades into the background, not necessarily in terms of prominence in this story, but in terms of, like, the first half of the movie, you're watching Ariana Grande do her thing and be the big and, colorful character that is really in your face and just really fun and entertaining, whereas the second half of the movie really does focus in on her performance and her tenderness as this character in a more personal and unique story. I think the Popular song was a great turning point for these characters, where you kind of were focusing on Glinda at first, now you get to focus on this other character. And of course, this movie is a very heavy-handed metaphor for racism. Everybody in this entire film, including Galinda's character and her father, and literally everybody treats, this Elphaba character so incredibly poorly. It is so on the nose, so in your face, by design. I do think that it is it's a movie that kind of shows you this reaction, shows you how ridiculous it all is, and shows you that, yes, it's very easy to empathize with a character like this because of how wrong she's treated throughout the entirety of the movie. And so you get her arc of wanting to burn everything down by the ending of the film and singing with passion that Defying Gravity song, because everybody is essentially just using her for whether it's trying to get more, prominence in her school and trying to get, to the point where the headmaster of the school is going to say, okay, maybe you have a chance to become a sorcerer, sure when it comes to Galinda's character, or when you have the actual headmaster of the school played by Michelle Yeoh, she's also kind of using this character because she has the magic, because she's working with the wizard to be able to, use the magic to create more of a stranglehold on the people of Oz, and that's the wizard's motivation. So everybody wants to use her. They don't really want to respect her. They just want to use her for what she's talented for, and shows absolutely no respect for who she actually is. And because Wizard of Oz is as big of a classic as it is, because of its Technicolor, revolution inside of Hollywood, I do think that this movie has some chances at the award season this year at the Oscars. And so, yes, I can see this movie being nominated for Best Picture and also for performances. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Ariana Grande really did take the nomination for Supporting Actress. I do think that they're going to go for supporting for her, because I do think Cynthia Erivo is kind of the lead character in this film, but I think Ariana Grande deserves to have a nomination, in the very least. I thought she was phenomenal. Rounding out the ensemble was Michelle Yeoh as the headmaster of this school, and also Jeff Goldblum as the Wizard of Oz, and I actually really liked their involvement in this story. I didn't expect the twist with Michelle Yeoh, honestly. Like I said, I had not seen the stage play before this, and then, after I watched the movie, I did go back and watch the green slime tutorial, and so I see that these characters were expanded a little bit inside of this movie itself. Their roles are not necessarily as big and as, prominent as, obviously, Glinda and Elphaba are going to be in this story, but I thought their expansion in this film was a necessary one, especially if you're going to cut this story into two parts. You're going to want to see the manipulation on Michelle Yeoh's side to build her up to the point that she is built up to, and giving her the amount of hope that Elphaba gets into, meeting the wizard and having all these hopes and dreams of, saving the animals and doing all the things that she wants to do inside of this film. I do think that betrayal felt a little bit more impactful in this film because of that expansion of those roles. And I mean, I'm never going to turn down an opportunity to have Jeff Goldblum play a very weird and goofy character on screen. I really liked his involvement in this. He's very Jeff Goldblum-like in this film, and so if you don't like his mannerisms, he's not toning that back at all. He's very much Jeff Goldblum as the Wizard of Oz in this movie, and I enjoy that. But also, another standout in this film in terms of the ensemble was, of course, Peter Dinklage as the Goto. I didn't realize it was Peter Dinklage until I saw one post on Letterboxd saying that it was so, and yes, Peter Dinklage is great as this character, and I do think that storyline was another one that I wasn't necessarily expecting to see inside of this movie, of having, this storyline of how, the other animals of the Oz universe are being essentially suppressed by the people in the government of Oz to, just be animals, be put in cages, and this propaganda they're going to, push to the people in these schools about how they're not allowed to teach, they're not allowed to speak out and say the words that they want to say to be able to, show the injustices that are happening inside of Oz. I do think that storyline was impactful, and of course, Peter Dinklage as the voice of the character really did work as well. And yes, this is a musical with a capital M. There are 11 songs inside of this movie that are all from the original Broadway show. I wasn't sure if they were added, some songs for some side characters because, maybe in the play they didn't have enough time to give them their own musical number, but no, that is not the case. All of these songs are from that original Broadway show, and the standouts for me, like I said, are The Wizard and I really did love that song. Popular is extremely well done. Of course, that's a very popular song inside of this play because it's one of the catchiest songs, and is the point of the movie where those two characters finally come together and, have a lot of, scenes together, and their back and forth is really fun and entertaining to watch. I also really did love What Is This Feeling for the very same reasons. Whenever Cynthia and Ariana are having their duet together, it is always fun to see, and also the song that FIYERO has inside of the library, I love that entire sequence. I think of all the sequences, Jon M Chu, his direction inside of that, and the set design for that entire musical sequence was phenomenal. Honestly, one of my favorite sets of the entire year, and when I talk about this movie and its chances at award season, just give it the award for best, set design right now. The production design on this movie is off the charts throughout the entirety of this film, and I think that also goes to the actual direction of this film from Jon M Chu and the vision that he had. It's very singular. I think this is a very beautiful looking movie, and I hear a lot of people talking about how this movie is very CGI heavy, very green screen heavy based off the trailers, but the actual movie itself, it is a 2-hour and 40-minute long movie, and their approach to it is very similar to that of the original Wizard of Oz, which is every time that you have any scene in this movie, you're on a soundstage, you're in a physical set that is built with extensions of green screen in the background that kind of extend the set beyond what you get to see inside of the room that you're actually in. And if that sounds familiar, that's exactly how they did Wizard of Oz, where you have a big set that is built inside of a soundstage, and instead of green screen, you have matte painting. So it gives the same sort of look and feel as something that was in the 1930s when that film was made, but you also get to have more sweeping camera moves because the distortion of those matte paintings, you couldn't really move the camera too much because then you'd see that, oh, that's just a wall, and if you move the camera to the left, that road is not going to go straight anymore. It's going to look like it just veers off in a different direction. So this movie, you get that flexibility to be able to have those sweeping camera moves, and I think Jon M Chu does that a good amount in this movie. I do think my frustration with his direction in this film is that there are a couple moments and a couple songs where I desperately wish he'd move the camera just a little bit more. Especially when you have Cynthia Erivo singing, you kind of want it to be really big because her voice it really does carry. It fills the entire room, and you want the camera to just, sweep up close to her face. You want it to do all these different things, and the camera moves very slowly throughout some of these dance sequences where you get to see the full choreography of everybody else in the background. But I kind of want a little bit more energy at times in this film, and there are a lot of times actually where that does happen, where that is the case. And so it's like, oh, I just wanted more of that because of how impactful it is when it does happen. But also, will the impact kind of lessen if you do that more often? Is it going to have as big of a moment at the end of Defying Gravity when you finally break free of that room and you have her flying around the castle? Like, is that going to have as much impact as if you had the sweeping camera moves closer to the beginning of that song where you see Cynthia Erivo finally singing, the main chorus of that song? I don't know, but in the moment of inside watching both of those sequences, I wish it happened just a little bit more. But with all that being said, let's get into the actual differences between the Broadway show and this movie itself. And I will say, since I watched the Green Slime tutorial, online, if you look it up, you can find different versions of the Broadway show. I couldn't find the actual original cast of the Wicked show because that happened in the early 2000s, and it's very hard to find any decent quality version of that show. It's nearly impossible to find. So I watched one of the Green Slime tutorials up until the point where you get to Defying Gravity, and I stopped at the moment in which the story ends. So I don't know the ending of the Broadway musical because I kind of want to save that for the film itself. And so just comparing that first half of the play and this first half of the story, I do think that the scenes that they expanded on, especially when it comes to character motivations, are actually really nice to have. I do think that if this movie was paced in the way that the Broadway show is paced, and that show I believe is 2 hours and 25 minutes long, or around there, if it was at that lightning speed and you did the entire story inside of one film, it is so fast. You go from song to song to song. You kind of skip over character motivations and why they make the decisions that they make because you're in a Broadway show. You need to go fast. You need to go from song to song and keep people entertained, and it works for the pacing of a Broadway show. And so when you change the medium from a Broadway show to a film, you do want scenes where you have characters actually talking, have characters explore why they have the motivations that they have, and it works for this medium. So I'm actually really glad that they did split it up into two parts, even if the runtime is a lot more bloated in this than it was in the original show. I think it works for this medium. I did mention this already earlier, the treatment of Elphaba's character with everybody else inside of this, school and everybody in her life is a lot more expanded on, it's a lot more on the nose here inside of this movie than it was inside the Broadway show, and actually seeing some stuff of her childhood, I do think added a good amount to her character motivation to see that, yes, I'm very much on her side by the end of this film when she has that whole Defying Gravity moment. I am so on board with her. They also explored a lot more for Galinda's motivation, which I did really appreciate, especially watching the original Broadway show. You never really get a hint as to why, this Galinda character wants to be a sorcerer at all, and this movie really explores that, yes, she has always gotten everything that she wanted. She is very, very entitled into all these different things, and to see her really want to be a sorcerer, and her, trying to talk to Michelle Yeoh's character throughout the entirety of the first half of this movie, and just being ignored through all of that, and seeing that this roommate of hers is getting all the attention, which adds to the jealousy of her character, which just kind of, expands why she does the things that she does inside this movie, including giving that pointed hat to her before that ballroom scene. All that stuff does make a lot more sense here inside of this movie than it did in that Broadway show, whereas it's just how it is in the Broadway show. You're just kind of flying through the story and all there. And it's not that all those motivations and all those, story points are not necessarily touched upon in the Broadway show at all, but the expansion, I do think, is an improvement inside of the film. I also really enjoyed the expansion for FIYERO, played by Jonathan Bailey, inside of this film, whereas, the Broadway show, like I said, I only watched the first half of the Broadway show, so I'm sure this character is going to be much more prominent in the second half of this story. But in terms of the actual movie itself, you get to see hints that he is not actually shallow. He's not actually self-absorbed like Galinda is when he runs into Elphaba in the forest at the midpoint of this movie before his introduction with his great song that he has inside of that library. You can see much more hints of him and Elphaba's connection throughout the first half of this movie, especially as it pertains to the scene where, Elphaba accidentally knocks out everybody inside of the classroom where she's saving this cat, and have that entire sequence and have this connection between these two characters kind of grow a little bit more naturally than it does inside of the play. You get to see a little peek behind the curtain of that character, and I did appreciate that as well. And I'm also extremely glad, because I thought this is the direction that this story was going, that's the reason why Elphaba and Galinda have a falling out in this movie is going to be because of this Jonathan Bailey character. I'm so glad that was not the case. I thought that would have been a lot more stereotypical to have the two women character, break up their friendship because of a boy. I would have hated that, so I'm very glad that is not the direction that they went, but I'm sure that this love triangle of sorts is going to play a big role in that second part of the movie once Galinda and Elphaba kind of already have they've already split off in their separate ways after Defying Gravity, which is it does make sense in the story that is the dividing point of these characters, where Galinda still has that motivation to be very, opportunistic. She doesn't want anything bad to happen with these characters. She just wants Elphaba to talk it out with the wizard, not understanding the consequences to her complicity in the wizard's actions in this moment. And when it comes to all the changes that this movie makes from the Broadway show, my favorite by far was the ballroom scene, which I am basing this off of the Green Slime tutorial that I did watch online, so maybe different cast members and different performances from the Broadway show are a little bit played differently in terms of this scene, but at least the version that I watched is very much played as jokes when Elphaba walks out onto the party scene and starts dancing. She clearly doesn't know how to dance whatsoever, and it's very much played for laughs, versus the movie, when she walks up onto that stage and she starts dancing, it feels much more like she knows what dance she's doing, she just doesn't have a dance partner to join her with. So it does look goofy, it does have a little chuckle for the audience there, but it feels much more somber, and it really does motivate Galinda's, change in heart in this moment that feels very genuine and heartfelt. I thought this was the most emotionally impactful moment in this movie besides the very end once, Elphaba flies out on that broom singing Defying Gravity. I thought this was easily the most heartfelt moment in the entire film. It was an absolutely beautiful sequence, and again, all the praise in the world for Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande in this sequence, kind of taking a step back from that comedic role that she had throughout the entirety of this film and just really having a more intimate moment between these two characters. And like I said, the chemistry between these two are phenomenal throughout the entire film, and just this portion of the movie, from their original song, singing about how they loathe each other, to this dance sequence, to the popular song right after this was easily my favorite part of the entire film. I loved it. And in terms of any of the moments from the play that I actually like a lot more than inside of the movie itself is definitely the save the cat moment. In the movie, it's more, she makes everybody fall asleep, and that is the distraction that she needs to get the cats out of there. And for some reason, Jonathan Bailey's character doesn't go to sleep. We don't really know why that happens. That is another loose story that is left from this movie to the next movie that maybe they'll explore a little bit more, but who knows about that. Inside of the actual stage play itself, instead of making everybody fall asleep, she makes everybody dance, and it's a lot more of a big musical number in that than it was inside of the movie. And so it just is a little bit more lively inside of that play and has a little bit more fun aspects to it, and I do kind of prefer that as well more over inside of this Broadway show as it did inside of this movie. And overall, the pacing of that play, like I said, is so rapid paced and so fun and so energetic that that difference is felt between these two versions of the story. But like I said, when you're switching to the medium of film, to be able to have editing, to flash between different locations during the musical numbers, to have the sweeping camera moves, to have more intimate moments with scenes with these characters having actual dialogue, it is actually really warranted in this story. So I am glad that they split it into two parts, and we're going to get the second part next year. I'm sure it'll be worth it by the end. Now, there are some loose plot threads in this movie that I'll have little predictions for part two, because like I said, I stopped the stage play, the Green Slime tutorial, at the point where you were hearing the whole Defying Gravity sequence, and so I stopped it at the same point in which this movie ends. So I don't know what happens later on in this story, but the plot threads that were kind of left open-ended were definitely the Jonathan Bailey storyline. I definitely want to see what they do with his character and how he either joins Elphaba and betrays Galinda, and what is his role going to be going forward, and is the next part just going to be a sort of pseudo remake of the Wizard of Oz? Is Dorothy going to be a character inside of that? I don't think that's going to be the case, but the way that this movie ends, the reason why I feel satisfied as this being a full movie instead of just a part one, is the fact that I feel like you can go from this movie and watch the original Wizard of Oz immediately afterwards and not feel like you're missing anything from the story, because you got the origin of the Wicked Witch of the West. What more do they have to go in this second half of the story? I'm very curious to see what more that is. And also, we're gonna all hate Galinda at the end of this, right? Because the way that she treats, the Wicked Witch, the way she talks about her inside of, the original Wizard of Oz movie is very cruel and very rude. And if they were originally friends and she's the only one that knows that, yes, there is a more, I guess, different perspective that you can look at this character that is more empathetic, and she's literally telling that to the people of Munchkin Town. Are the people of Munchkin Town just going to absolutely hate her after this because they made her revolt against this person who didn't deserve to be revolted against, and to create somebody to hate, to bring people together? That is a very messed up thing that happens in our real world that this movie is a giant metaphor for. And so are people going to turn on Glinda because she's a very cruel and evil character? And yes, she ends up at the point in this movie in a way where she's not necessarily mortal enemies with the Wicked Witch just yet. So I think that is also going to be explored more in that second half of the movie. What is Elphaba going to do to make Glinda truly turn against her? What is the wizard and Madame MORRIBLE going to say to her that makes Glinda turn more against, Elphaba's character in this? Because their separation in this was a lot more heartbreaking than I was expecting it to be at this point in the story. And so there is for sure much more to explore with those two characters' arcs alone. But again, I do think it comes to a satisfying enough end for the story itself. But those are just going to be my thoughts on Wicked. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Did you love it as much as I did? Do you not like musicals at all and you hated this movie? If so, why did you watch it? Why even participate in this whatsoever? But either way, if you did enjoy it or if you didn't enjoy it, let me know in the comment section down below. Are you a fan of this Broadway Broadway play? Should I go watch the actual Broadway play? Are they still playing it anywhere? I'd really love to go actually, experience this in a theater, watching these characters on stage. It'd be really fun to see that live. But if that's not a thing anymore, maybe I'll finish the green slime tutorial that I was watching, which was a lot of fun as well. So if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a comment down below, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I will be also talking about Gladiator 2 tomorrow as well, so if you want to see my thoughts on that film, I'm watching it tonight. I cannot wait for that as well. So thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one.